All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to turn off this transcription thing if that's okay. Um, so, good morning, everyone. It's May 13th. We're having our spring audit compliance and governance meeting. I would just ask that people to please mute their microphones if they are not talking to avoid any background noise. As always, everyone is welcome to attend in our Hartford office, which probably less necessary for committee meetings, but we'd obviously love to have everyone for board meetings. If you're not being heard, please use the chat box, and I'll make a point to let the committee chair know. We are recording this meeting, and I just asked for our minute taker Ariel that the first time you speak, if you could state your name, please let us know. But I think we know everyone here, so I don't even know if we have to do that one. So with that, Tom, I would be happy to turn it over to you to kick the meeting off.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend. We'll call the meeting to order, and I'll kick it over to Brian so that he can run us through the agenda very quickly.
Perfect. And so this should be a pretty straightforward meeting, which I don't mean to jinx it here. We're really looking to be getting a resolution to make a recommendation to the full board. Jane and Dan Smith from our accounting team will be leading that discussion. We're going to have Mariana Treef and Alex Kotnavenka on the phone, who are going to talk about what was previously called our loan loss process, which is now going to be just called our loss provision process, as we look to make some amendments and revisions to that process. And those are probably the two most important meetings. And then we'll also go over where we are with board member status and our other reporting requirements. So I guess with that, I would ask if anyone has any public comments, if we have anyone from the public that would like to speak. All right, excellent. I'll be happy to move forward with the agenda if you want me to, Tom, too, and then feel
Please.
free. Sure. So the next item we would have would be the approval of the meeting minutes from our January 14th meeting. If we could have a motion to approve those minutes, it would be greatly appreciated.
So moved.
All right. A second?
Joanna will second.
Thanks, Joanna. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, perfect.
Aye.
Thank you. Those opposed? Abstention? All right, the meeting minutes pass. And now we'll move on to the Green Bank loss decision process, where I'm going to have Mariana, Bert, feel free to chime in if you like to, and Alex lead on this item. So.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everybody. So the team staff worked on our loss decision process, which was previously called loan loss. And we worked it up to make sure it aligned with our sort of evolving project structures. And the main purpose, in addition to making sure that it aligned with our project structures, was to make sure that the policy addressed something that had not been included before, which was commercial solar projects, which are developed by the Green Bank and are terminated prior to construction completion. So this was added to the document, and I'll go through how we're thinking about that in the next slide. But in doing so, we went ahead and did other revisions, primarily to streamline language, improve consistency, clarity, flow, update our list of programs and reserve percentages, and just added a few other examples to guide the implementation and improve usability of the loan loss process. So if you could go to the next slide. So for the project termination budget, this applies to projects, again, commercial solar projects where some costs have been incurred, and the project typically, sort of when the project moves forward, costs are incurred, and at some point when the project is placed in service, it is either sold to a third party who will own it over the long term, or if the Green Bank is going to own that project, it becomes a capital asset at the time it is placed in service. And there are times when some of these projects cannot move forward prior to finalizing construction or even beginning construction. And this is typically due to interconnection costs, permitting challenges, or just site conditions that arise during the development phase. And these projects need to be terminated. And that wasn't really addressed by the loan loss process. So the way we've addressed it and included it.
Marianne, quick question, just so what kind of numbers are we talking about here in general on these? What's our experience been?
It's not usually high numbers. I would say it's in like the maybe 20 to 50,000.
Is that per project or annually that we're writing off, $20 to $50,000 on kind of projects that don't move forward?
I don't have those figures, Dan. I don't know if you're on. And
I'm
you
here.
might
This is Dan
know what
Smith,
this.
Director of Accounting and Reporting. I'd say that's more like an annual number. They're usually things like a performance assurance deposit, which at any given time aren't large figures. But
Right.
it's
So we're
rarely after
talking
construction
about,
starts.
right. So is 50 the high end of that range? So we're talking about the exposure here is $50,000 a year approximately for projects that we incur costs on and then eventually end up writing off because we don't move forward with those projects?
Without having the details, I would say that's a safe number to assume.
Yeah, could you just follow back up with us on that? And are those projects, Marianne, I'm sorry to jump in
Nope, go
here, but
ahead.
I'm just trying to get a sense of the scope here. Are those costs that are hung up on the balance sheet over a couple of years, or do we know this pretty quickly?
No, it's usually no more than a year or so.
Okay, so these
So
are costs that are incurred within a year, ranging about $50,000 a year that we end up writing off because of some reasons these projects don't go forward.
yeah, so I actually pulled up the data,
Okay.
and I have it. I can tell you a little bit about the termination. So in 2021, it was $2,000 of performance assurance amount. 2022, we had to terminate 3 of our state solar projects, and that was associated with wetlands in the property. And so we weren't able to continue doing that. And those wetlands had not been identified during sort of the initial surveys. So those 3 projects, the total for that, and those were large projects. Sorry, that was 2 projects that were terminated. That was 160,000. And then one other project that was terminated but changed contractors. So that one's still moving forward. So I wouldn't count that one. So that was 160,000. And then 2022.
That's a lot. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, in 2024, there was Sharon, and that was due to local siting council was opposing the project and made it so that it wasn't feasible to do it with the requirements they were requesting. That was 42,000. So I would say there's a range, but I appreciate your question because the way we're thinking about it, and we've proposed in the loss process is setting aside a development budget annually, and that would be done through the budgeting process. It would be developed collaboratively by accounting, investments, and financing programs teams and approved annually by sort of the board through the regular budget and targets process. And so I'm just going to finish this thought, Matt, and then I'll go to you. in terms of approvals, anything under that budget, which would have already been approved, if a project is terminated, it'll go against that budget. And anything that is above that budget would sort of follow the same value or modification requirements as is outlined here. So anything less than 100,000 would stay in the staff, anything between 100,000 and $1 million to deployment, and anything greater than that to the board. So again, this would be for any values of projects terminated above what would have already been approved under the budget process. Matt?
Okay, I'm gonna defer to Matt, and then please come back to me.
Well, go ahead, Tom. Finish your thought. I can wait. It's not.
Are you sure?
Yep.
Yeah, I have a comment and a follow-up question. How much of this do we currently have on the balance sheet? How many, of these capitalized type costs that are waiting to see whether we can move forward on the projects?
I mean, the way I would think about it, Tom, is this is probably usually less than 20% of project costs.
Yeah, but how much are we talking about? And just dollars a month, Mariana.
In terms
I
of
just want to know what our exposure is.
in terms of what our budget is for project development, or like how much we
No,
currently have under
I'm
development.
sorry. Yeah, how much do you currently have? Because essentially the way, unless I'm misunderstanding this, right? What you're doing is you're incurring costs relative to specific projects, and it sounds like what you're doing is hanging them up on the balance sheet. And then if the project moves forward, they become part of the cost of the project. And it goes against, it either gets capitalized or it gets moved out, whatever, expensed as part of the project, right? But I'd like to know, do we have $1 million worth of costs up on the balance sheet, or am I misunderstanding what the process is for this?
I guess where I would add that there's a little bit of nuance is we sign EPC agreements with contractors to install the entire project.
Yeah.
And so it is during that sort of process of development and installation that a portion of those costs, the project can move forward, and a portion of those costs need to be paid out to the contractor for work that he's done as a project.
Yeah, I'm just
the
asking
project
how
needs to
much
get
we
terminated.
actually.
So
Yeah, I'm just asking how much we have on the balance sheet.
Mariana, I can jump in. So we have 2.4 million in PPA development receivables, which is the actual construction costs on ongoing projects. We think all of those are still good right now. So none of those are anticipating to be write off. We have about 1.2 million in performance assurance deposits. We usually try and analyze that at year end to see if there are any bum numbers in there. We haven't looked at it yet. I wouldn't think there's much, but that's the total balance currently.
So is that,
And
should I read that as like 3 million total?
Yeah.
Somewhere in that number?
Yeah, in like construction costs on the balance sheet that we're expecting to recover when the projects get sold.
Yeah, quick comment here, quick question. Marion, in the couple of examples that you gave where it was like, hey, the siting council do this, or they sound like very early stage costs, right? And I just question from an accounting perspective, and hear me out here, and I'm not a GASB expert. Whether those typically, right, what happens is before you know whether a project is going to move forward under GAAP, any costs incurred you essentially expense under conservatism. And then once you know a project is going to move forward, you start capitalizing costs. It sounds here, unless again I'm misunderstanding, what we do, and I'm not saying it's wrong, is we put those costs up on the balance sheet. And then if it doesn't move forward, we expense them. Do I understand that correctly?
I would say
Hey.
yes, Tom, as it relates to these construction type projects. Because the ultimate goal of these
Okay.
projects is to sell them and recoup. It's
Right.
not exactly like inventory.
Right.
In an inventory case, like in a manufacturing case, you would, have that all flow through the P&L. We
Yep.
The performance assurance deposits are paid up front, and somebody else might be able to jump in and explain them more, but ultimately at the end of the project, once the project gets connected, the utilities repay those performance assurance deposits. So they're
Right.
expected to be returned. And just in the last year or so, we've been better about putting that into the sales price of these projects that we're developing, along with the construction costs.
Yeah, and I totally agree with putting them into the cost of the project. I was more concerned about what goes up on our balance sheet, but I agree with what you're saying. Yeah. I'm sorry, somebody else was trying to talk.
Yeah, it was Tom. It's Bert here. This is actually kind of an evolution of what we have done. Oh gosh, excuse me. Someone seems to be barging in the door. It's an evolution. The CNI solar business that we've done for a decade now, and
Yeah.
previously we were routinely under Solar Lease 2 and Solar Lease 3. We were developing these projects and signing up EPCs and putting them on the balance sheet of those. I think it was Sepia Holdings, Dan or Jane, if you can confirm that. And so what we're doing here, really the process here, and I really do appreciate the line of inquiry, because I think there is a little bit of insufficient awareness, I'll put it that way, by the committee on how this might work. But what we're doing here in this particular process is really bringing transparency and clarity to situations that we grappled with as to how we can recognize and bring forward these costs that are properly capitalized into a project. I mean, that's what these things are. I mean, they're discrete solar, generally development projects that are brought along. And we have historically had no problem with doing these developments and then selling them on, as complete projects without having to write off expenses, et cetera. There are these occasions where, a project will get hung up at various stages, but so we're trying to plan and capture that impact. So I think we can run this through, but our accountants, our financial accountants have not questioned how we've been accounting for these costs as long as they're projects. But I would take the point, if we're talking about general overhead or things like that, that we're not doing that. It's not a general cost, specific project costs.
And it goes to my last point, and I do want to recognize that Matt, thank you for your patience. You've run this proposed policy and all this accounting treatment by our financial accountants, correct?
Dan and Jane would have to speak to that, but they review this with the whole business with the accountants every year. So I don't know, Dan.
Yeah.
Dan actually was one.
I was, yeah. I was a prior accountant of the Green Bank. This isn't a change to the accounting process, I wouldn't say.
No, the only change is the fact that you're trying to calculate a reserve on it, right? Where in the past it sounds like you just recognized the loss when the loss became apparent. Is that fair? So it's more conservative.
So we're not even going to put a reserve on. We're just asking for an expense line in the budget, basically, like up to a certain, probably minimal amount that we can just write off without necessarily needing to go to the.
Let me ask you a question. Should we put a reserve on, or it's immaterial?
I would think it's immaterial.
Yeah, I would just run that by the auditors, maybe, just to make sure. But because that 160 is a high number, right? And the volatility here. And Marianne, my apologies for jumping in on your presentation.
No,
I'm sorry about that.
all good questions. And I think one of the things that's helpful is this fiscal year, what hasn't been written off and what has either been placed in service or sold off is 5.8 million. So it gives you a sense of
The exposure.
what is moving
yeah.
ahead, the exposure, what is moving ahead versus what isn't moving ahead. And that value is also probably a little bit low. We sold a very big portfolio of these SAP 1 projects to Total. And we sold them sort of mid-construction. So they paid us for what we had paid until that mid-construction, but they probably put in about another $4 million. And so from like a total deployment, you would say, yes, we wrote off that value of 160,000, which is not nothing, but compare it to maybe $10 million of what of the projects that did come to fruition is, I think, one way to think about it too.
Yep. Thank you. Matt, I
Matt.
apologize for taking time.
No, it's all really interesting. I guess my question was, it sounds like when we've talked about the write-offs from the past, I kept hearing that a lot of it was performance assurance. Is that the main category of the amount? Is that the performance assurance like that we're giving to Eversource or UI as part of, for example, the NRES program? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, when we talk about performance assurance, it's either on the ZREX or the NRES that we give to the utilities to secure that incentive. I would say a portion of it is definitely those funds, but then another portion of it is work that has actually been done for interconnection, for example, drawings, et cetera, interconnection applications, surveys, engineering designs, that sort of thing.
Do we, when we, I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask it. Do we try to shift when we're bringing in projects, any of the performance assurance payment to the host, or, in other words, like we'll pay half, they pay half, or we just pay the whole performance assurance?
Currently, we pay the whole performance assurance. The majority of development that we've done, that we are doing, where we're paying performance assurance, has been state, muni, affordable multifamily.
Yeah.
And even an affordable multifamily, I'm not sure if you have performance assurance, but it's basically been state and muni. And so we've included that as part of sort of the service that's offered to them from us.
Yeah. I
So
wonder if one of the changes, like, from 2021, the amount was really low. But I know somewhere in that time period, Eversource changed, or the program changed when the performance assurance got paid, and now it gets paid at bid. And so it seems like our exposure is now sort of a little greater because it used to be paid at award, and at least by then we kind of knew things. So I wonder if it's not fair to think we'll get more of the numbers we've been getting the past few years as opposed to what we were getting before that change. I have no problem with it. I mean, it sounds like we're not going to shift those costs. I guess on the chart that you have here, just for my education, my recollection is for the write-off where you have restructuring, default penalties, et cetera, where it's just staff, the under $100,000 column. We get, I think, a quarterly report or something, right, of all that activity. Is that right? I think we get an update, sort of an aggregated update on what's been written off.
That's right. Yeah, we try to report out at board meetings, and sometimes they're just blank. But we report.
And in the bottom category, the termination values that do not exceed the project termination budget. I assume the project termination budget is always going to be lower than the category on the top row, right? In other words, for the 100,000, the project termination budget is always going to be lower than 100,000.
I would say that it depends on how it's being determined for that year based on what's in the pipeline. If 100,000 is
well, I guess
then
the question is, why in the bottom row, why not just keep the delineation the way you have it in the row above, staff, deployment, board of directors? So the higher value projects. Yeah. What's the reasoning there?
The reasoning was that because we were going to go ahead and do a budget, like an expense item for these project terminations, that was already going to be reviewed by the board and approved by the board. So it wasn't necessary to go ahead and approve
All right,
it
so-
again through the process, because let's say the board approves for a given year, we have, I don't know, 10 megawatts in the pipeline, and we determine sort of based on that, we need 200,000 of, and I would call it like development capital that might, if projects move forward, that money is never expensed because those projects are capitalized. But if they're not, then that's the write-off, right? So we have that expense that's approved. Anything under that we need to terminate has already been approved. Anything over that would have to go through the process that other restructuring or write-offs would have to go through, which is as described here, going to staff deployment or the board based on value.
That makes sense. Thank you.
And Matt, I'll point out with a performance assurance, because that's changed. One of the things we have done in our process, especially for the larger state projects we're developing now, is we're working earlier with third-party owners of solar, doing bids earlier and having them be responsible for those performance assurance payments to shift that risk.
I think it does put the emphasis on knowing more sooner, even though that means spending money to find that out. Thank you.
Yep.
To Matt's point, and following up on an earlier comment that I made, and thanks, Matt, for the color and understanding of the timing of that process and stuff. If we put this in the expense budget, you might want to think about talking to your auditors and developing a reserve against this and how they feel. If in fact, as Matt pointed out, we're getting our exposure is growing because it's a different process with the utility companies. I leave that to a discussion between you and the auditors, but if you've got it, you might as well put it up in reserve. So if something does come, you can take it against the reserve as opposed to impact your earnings, substantially. Not substantially, but in higher than normal amounts. Just a thought.
Okay.
Boy, that shut everybody
Thank
up.
We'll keep it in mind for sure this year.
All right, well, this was all, I think, good feedback. And obviously this is a two-step process, so we would want to then take, with this feedback, take this to the board we'd obviously want a recommendation from the ACG committee to now, as a next step, bring this to the board. If you guys are overall comfortable with this approach.
I have no problem putting this in the budget. I would ask that you just follow up with the auditors and kind of explain the process a little bit and see if we need, or if you guys to come to some conclusion about establishing a reserve amount on this too on an annual basis. But I had no problem with you including this in the budget. And I agree with the commentary about this being more transparent and everything else. That's just my opinion, obviously.
That makes complete sense. So we could take that as, hopefully, let's take that as a staff action that we can recognize on the minutes as something that we'll follow up and report out back at the board meeting that we did.
Could we also add to that? This is Joanna. Could we add into that like the past 5 years of the costs that have to the earlier discussion of like what are the ranges from 160 to 50 to just what have we seen in the past?
That's a great idea.
We can make that part of a presentation to the board.
Yeah, I think it's always good to establish what the context is and what the materiality is.
Absolutely. Agree. Great feedback.
All right, with that, just ask if there is if someone can make a motion for this recommendation of the resolution to the full board for approval of the revised.
I will make that recommendation. I will make that motion.
Do a second?
Second.
All right, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, Those opposed? Any abstentions? All right, perfect. Thank you all. So I'll move on to the next item, which are probably our other major substantive item for the day, is the selection of the audit firm for audit services for fiscal year 2025 through 2027. And Dan and Jane will be leading on this topic, so I'll turn it over to them.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Dan Smith, Director of Accounting and Reporting. So I got the pleasure of going through the RFP process this year, sending it out, receiving the proposals. So just as background, under statute, we can contract the same firm for our external ACFR audit for a period not to exceed 6 years, with a requirement to go out to RFP every 3 years. Our prior 3-year period was up. We used PKF O'Connor Davies, and that was their first 3-year period. So we received 5 proposals in response to the RFP, one from PKF O'Connor Davies, Barry Dunn, Whittlesey, Clifton Larson Allen, and Crow. And if you could move to the next slide. So we put together a team to review the proposals and kind of grade them. And so that was Jane, myself, Sean Cartelli, who's our controller, and Tyler Rubega, who's our senior accountant on our team, who works closely with the auditors throughout the process. Each proposal was evaluated based on independence, license to practice and peer review, qualifications and experience, similar engagements that they have, which is kind of key for us because we're pretty unique, and then fees and the references they provided. So after reviewing the 5 proposals, we determined as a team, we all selected PKF O'Connor Davies to hopefully bring to you guys as a recommendation to select them for another 3-year period. And as background, their fees were the second lowest of the 5, with the lowest being Barry Dunn, but they're not local, and their travel costs weren't included in the RFP. So we were a little concerned that that might add up. But besides that, if there's any questions, comments.
Is Joe Senefani still leading the audit? Is that for
So
PKF?
So Catherine Patenaude will be the main partner, it looked like, for the proposal, and Joe is like the quality / technical partner, so still involved. He was on the proposal, but it sounds like, Catherine became partner last year, maybe 18 months ago. So it sounds like they would transition to her doing more of it, but she was our manager on the job already prior. So
yeah. And you were obviously happy with her performance and all of that. And not just her, I'm not trying to get a performance evaluation. You've been happy with PKF in terms of their audit. Just full disclosure, I worked Joe Senefani and PKF Davies was the audit firm for the town of Fairfield when I was both chairman of the Board of Finance as well as on the Board of Selectmen. I've worked with Joe Senefani probably for the last decade or so, and quite frankly have the highest regard for him and his firm. So I would support this, and I was not part of this process at this time, but look, they've done a great job, and my experience with Joe has been stellar through all my iterations. So you've got my full support.
And we'd be happy with the service we've been getting also, for what it's worth.
Yeah.
My only question is, are we required to, isn't there like a certain number of years we can use the same firm and then we have to?
6.
Yeah, so it's 6 and we have to RFP every 3, and this would be their second 3-year term.
Great. Okay.
So if there's any other questions, and if there's not, I would entertain this resolution to select them as to make a recommendation to the full board, PKF, for another 3-year term.
So moved.
This is Joanna. I'll make that motion.
Oh, I'll second.
I'll second. Whichever one.
Perfect. All right. Those in favor say aye.
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 All right. Opposed? And any abstentions? All right, perfect. Well, thank you guys so much. And then the next one is a related to authorized signers. This was kind of a cleanup attempt to clarify as it relates to names and titles of positions. And I believe Jane, you'll be speaking on this one, or is this Dan too?
Oh, I figured I wouldn't have Dan speak on something that would actually involve him on the resolution. So, good morning. Our current signing authority comes from Resolution 6 of the board, which was back on October 21st of 2016. That resolution gave the president and CEO the authority to set up bank accounts, and it also authorized specific Green Bank employees that could do checks and ACH wire initiation. And that particular resolution gave us the current positions listed below, who are president and CEO, Vice President of Finance and Administration, the EVP and Chief Investment Officer, Vice President Commercial and Industrial. At that point, we had a Managing Director of Statutory and Infrastructure, as well as our Director of Operations. Most of those people are still with us, but a few positions have turned over. Next slide, please. What we would like to do is to update the authorized signers, of course, to the people occupying the positions currently. But we would also like to add any director level, which would be job grade 18 or higher accounting unit members. These would be the position descriptions have been approved by the board. For us, as we're starting to grow, it'll give us additional coverage while staff is out. And we still require 2 signatures on any checks that are over $5,000. And usually that's the thing that ends up causing us a lot of angst is I'll sign something and BG, I'll leave it on his chair for a Saturday morning and I'll come back and get it on Monday and throw it in the mail. So it ends up causing a little bit of angst. And when I know BJ loves to take a month out of the office, and I do like my vacations as well. So sometimes it's a little bit challenging to grab people in Hartford to get things signed. So the proposed positions we would like are president and CEO remains the same. EVP Finance Administration essentially remains the same. EVP and Chief Investment Officer remains the same. Executive Vice President Financing Program, still the same person, slightly different title. Vice President of Operations, same position. And then any director level job grade 18 or higher accounting unit members. Do I have another slide there saying who's in what, or is it my resolution that's next? Okay. This will actually say who is in the appropriate positions currently now. So those same positions are on the resolution, and the staff occupying those positions now are Brian, myself, Bert Hunter, Mackie Dykes, Eric Schrago, and the new addition would be Dan Smith. So are there any questions and discussion?
Jane, it's Matt. My initial reaction is I don't love it. I understand there are times where it might be hard to find a signature, but like having the last category, presumably we're going to add people sort of on the fly with that job description. It's not really like the ones above it. And I just wonder, I mean, would increasing the $5,000 number to, $7,500, I mean, where's the bottleneck? Is it at a certain dollar value, or is it just finding people to sign checks?
It's mostly for requiring 2 signatures. Most of the checks that we have are below, and if something needs to go out and we can't find somebody to sign something, we'll do an electronic transaction instead if we have the ability and the banking information. Brian Farnan, do you know where the 5,000 came from as a limit? Is it something that's statutorily? I know here
I
when
I don't believe that is a statutory limitation. That I wouldn't be surprised if that was an APA recommendation from
ages ago.
from over a decade ago.
Okay.
But I think
I guess I mean, I don't, this is outside, I don't do a lot of this, but I just think I have been in other nonprofit organizations where when it starts to get a little ambiguous who can sign checks, as things go on, it gets, there's not a lot of clarity. And then sooner or later something happens and we then rein it back in and say, let's narrow it back down. So I guess I'm just wondering if there's a lot of checks that are, just over 5,000 that are causing issues, or if there are a lot of checks at all, or if everything's moving more towards ACH, or, I just having like the director level seems like we're just, to me, I don't know I really don't know who that will be. I know it's Dan Smith because you told me in this slide, but whereas the other ones, I think there's a lot of clarity for people in the organization, people on the board. They know who belongs to each one of those positions.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add, Matt, any director level position or above has to be reviewed and approved by the board. We typically do it on the consent agenda. In this case, we could flag the additional responsibility if there is an accounting department director level position, and person recommended. So there is a control there. We don't just create director level positions. The board reviews and approves them.
Do we envision there'll be like if you look down the road at our growth, is this a position where there's going to be 5 people in that level, or 2 people, or 10 people?
I would think the most we would see here would be 2.
First of all, I agree with Matt's comments. It's Tom. I think the bottom one is a little bit too ambiguous. I do understand having 2 people in accounting. That makes sense, and that's fairly common. So I have no problem with that, or accounting and finance typically. I mean, finance. And then the only other thing, there's been a lot of discussion about actually signing checks. It would be really interesting to know how much we pay electronic and how much we pay in checks. I'm not talking dollar amounts, but transactions. And I would argue that we could solve this a bit by moving more towards electronic transactions as opposed to physical checks, and using the security systems available through the banks in order to approve those transactions. So, for example, if Brian Garcia was out of the office, but he had access, he would be able to dial in and then dial in's the wrong number, the wrong, the wrong nomenclature, but he would be able to get online and approve the transactions. Is one way to make this a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah, I would say that probably 85 to 90% of our transactions, maybe even 90 to 95, are electronic currently. There just are a couple of things where it's stupid things. They're small ones, paying the Verizon.
Yeah, I get it.
No, I don't want them debiting my checking account automatically, so I'm going to send them a check.
No, I understand exactly what you're saying, and thank you for the clarification on that. I still stand with Matt that I think that the director level, the last comment is just a little too vague. I understand wanting a couple of people in accounting, but I think maybe you just specifically name it. And then when you get the next one, Brian, to your point, the directors have to be approved anyway. So when you come back and say approve the director, say approve them to be check signers if that's appropriate too. It's my view.
Yeah. The other thing, along with being able to sign checks, is currently Now, I do all of the initiations of the electronic transactions, and then per the internal control procedures we have Sean and Dan who are able to release those. Eric also does it on a reasonably regular basis, but the rest of the authorized signers here have the ability to do it as well. This would allow the director level position to initiate those transactions rather than just be an approver as well.
Yeah, I think you should write that up, clarify it, and I don't have a problem with it.
Okay, so you would want us to specifically
Go ahead.
specifically change the title to say Director of Accounting and Reporting.
Yes,
And make
that's
it
that's just my opinion.
okay. Matt.
One caveat, do we want it so that it's just one if there's two signers, they wouldn't both be from accounting though. So this is basically, do we need to clarify that this is only when the the executive vice president.
A lot of times they are both from accounting, just from a logistics standpoint, Brian. What
yeah,
else? Yeah.
I think that would probably more be the norm should this be approved.
Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, that's been my experience in accounting shops.
All right. And then I guess I would, with that revision, Joanna, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'm wondering, is there an industry standard for certain size organizations and the number of people who are allowed to sign checks over a certain amount? I just worry that it's, obviously we have the people in here now and we know them, but that might change in the future. And it's not so much individuals, but when you have more people, there's more chances for things to go wrong. So is there just a gold standard for us to judge this by?
I actually don't know.
I can't speak. I can't speak for a quote unquote not for profit or governmental entity necessarily, but I do know that in private organizations and companies, it really is up to the tolerance level of the board of directors and the governing body as to how they want to handle that. I've never seen in my years of doing it kind of a standard, but that's just me.
I just had, my view here is colored by having been on a board where we had an issue below with checks being written inappropriately, and it's really not a situation anyone wants to be in. So while I get the convenience, I just favor, that when something bad happens, that all of a sudden in retrospect sounds like not a great reason. But I would be okay with naming, director of accounting or some, a position. But I just
Agreed.
worry that there's confusion below is really what I worry about. People don't know who to go to get a check, et cetera. So I like to keep it a little tighter and as I view that as our role as the board is to kind of be comfortable with the financial, controls.
I couldn't agree more.
I'm sorry if I
we
missed
make
this
that
earlier. And what
change,
is this certain?
yeah. Sorry.
Was this for what was the threshold for adding this extra signatory? Or is this any and all checks?
Any and all checks.
Oh yeah, I have the same reservation.
Yeah, so it's any and all checks, but you left out a key. Well, I'm not. That sounds accusatory. I don't mean it that way, Jane. But it's also for the wires too, right? It's for electronic transactions.
It would be for It would be for initiating where currently that does not occur.
Yeah. Which I don't have. Quite honestly, I have no problem with that. I'm astonished that you have to initiate them all anyway.
No, actually, sorry, I've got it backwards. They initiate, I approve. This would,
That's
yeah, I've
uh,
too
allowed
early.
him to approve. Yeah, I get it. That makes sense to me.
This is Lonnie. Just agreeing with everything you guys are saying. I mean, I keep thinking of the Deirdre Gifford thing with Connecticut Mirror and all of that. I mean, it's as much as we can clean up everything so that it totally looks copacetic, and that there's no questions about it. I think that's really important.
So do we want to revise that last bullet? Oh, I'm sorry, Joanna.
Yes,
If it was something that
I
was
think
a regular amount, like that was like payroll, that somebody needed to make sure that the same exact amounts that were going out on a recurring basis, I feel like that's a little different. If it's more of transactions or higher amounts, that's what gives me pause.
So I think what we're going to do on that last bullet is we're going to revise it to just say, to just basically add in the new name of Director of Finance, to make it consistent with the other ones, to just have Dan Smith with his title. Is that the agreement?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Yeah, that would be Director of Accounting and Reporting.
I agree.
So I would entertain a motion with the additional caveat that if you notice something glaring from this list is my name is not included. So I'm not, so.
Thank God.
We don't want the lawyers signing checks, do we?
No.
No.
100%. Just kidding. All right. So with that, can I have a motion in a second?
I'll move the resolution with the amendment discussed to replace the last bullet with the appropriate title, Director of Accounting and Reporting, or whatever the actual title is.
I second that.
Right. Those in favor?
Aye.
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 Those opposed? And any abstentions? All right. Thank you guys so much. And I think we can go really quickly. I want to do a super fast legislative update. And James, we do have him, so I'll give him a minute, and I'll just add, I'll steal his thunder that SB9 did get out of committee. With the vote, Tom, I will admit of the one Republican to vote in favor it, Tony Wong. And before we get into the legislative, I would just say the major other item going on is not the legislative at the state level, but the federal level last night, where the first version of the new tax bill came out, and the big kind of ticket items there. And Brian, I think I misspoke earlier on this point, is the fact that the investment tax credit, which is so crucial for solar deployment, it is only the residential ITC that would be facing that accelerated phase out by the end of the year. The commercial ITC would be going to 2029, and then there's obviously that's kind of the big news there. And then the other big news is the electric vehicle tax credit would be being phased out, and that is not, there is no, I misspoke earlier, Brian, when we were talking, because this came out late last night. There is no real differential between the commercial and residential, but in the grand scheme of thing, I don't know how much of an impact that tax credit would have as it relates to the bus, since it's under 10 grand. So with that, James, I'll turn it over to you to give a quick update with our last few minutes left.
It is a big, beautiful bill, Brian. Good morning, everyone. James DeSantos, Legislative Liaison for the Green Bank. Just want to walk you through this very, very high level. For everything that we do know is out there, the Green Bank is in a very good position right now. There's 21 days left in session on the calendar. Two big bills are moving through the process. You have the 5004, which is the Green Monster bill. It's a reboot from last year. It basically revitalizes the Connecticut Clean Economy Council, which the Green Bank has a seat on. It also has DEEP to evaluate how to integrate nature-based solutions into the state. Part of that evaluation is that DEEP must seek review and input from the green banks before it's posted for written comments. So we're a part of that. The second bill, which Brian kind of alluded to, and Joanna on the call has been the lead on, is the governor's resilience bill. Now, this bill has gone around the world, right? So it started in environment, went to judice, appropriations, and finance. And the reason for that, it's very similar to last year's bill, but the environmentalists added a neonicotinoid and rodenticide piece on there, which are two pieces that the environmentalists have been unable to pass the past several years. So they tried to tack it on this bill and hopefully get it over the finish line. The third item that I want to talk about is really a mashing of three bills together. Our primary focus this legislative session has been to protect the line item of the public benefit charge to the Clean Energy Fund, to the Green Bank. That has been our primary focus all session. We saw the House Republican and Senate Republican caucus bill 647 come out in the beginning of session. They wanted to move the public benefit charge off of the electric bills and put it into the state budget. Now, that would have been dangerous because that would have subjected everything to line item veto and competing against other priorities. And then you had Senate Bill 1560, which was introduced by Senator Fanfara. I'm sure you've been reading a lot about that in the press. That came out a few weeks ago. That created a new quasi-public authority and would have removed the public benefits from the electric bill and bonded it. $800 million over 3-year periods, and would have to be authorized every 3 years moving forward. Right now, the vehicle is Senate Bill 4. That is the Senate Democrat Energy and Technology. That's their omnibus bill. Senate Bill 1560, elements of that and other bills will be put into that. So currently we're in the process of working to negotiate that language, and we should see a draft this Wednesday. And a huge thank you to Chair Reed and Brian Garcia and Brian Farnan, who've been actively involved in negotiating this since the beginning. So like I said in the beginning, everything we do know, we're in a very good position. Now it's just making sure that what is going to come out and what we don't know for the last 3 weeks that we're on top of. So that's all I have for an update, Brian, if you want to add anything.
Perfect, James. Any questions before we move on to our statutory reporting?
I think we're all good.
All right,
Great,
excellent.
thank you.
And then
Thank you.
I am happy to report that all of our statutory filings are up to date. The ones that we do on a quarterly basis, we're talking really about quarterly cash flow, quarterly human resources, and then OPIC Connecticut checkbook, which we do to the comptroller's audit office. And then the real big push is the November, December. That meeting is, that January meeting we have at the beginning of the new year is really where we need to meet a bevy of different reporting requirements that are due before the end of calendar year. So nothing major to report there. And then as for board member updates, I think we probably need to kind of huddle with board leadership and kind of, I know we've, the Laura Hoydick position that's been outstanding, and we have a couple ideas that have been coming that we've been thinking about. So we should probably revisit that too to get that position filled. But other than that, no major updates there. All right, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Seconded.
Excellent. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And abstentions. All right, thank you everyone for a great ACG meeting, and I'll see you at the board meeting coming up.
Thanks,
Take
everybody.
care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, thanks everyone.